Welcome to the Museum MFIT's online symposium devoted to shoes. My name is Tania Melendez Escalante, and I am Senior Curator of Education and Public Programs. It is my honor to welcome Melissa Marra and Elizabeth Way, two curators from the Museum at FIT, who will discuss their exhibition Head to Toe. Enjoy the show.
So good morning. Today, my colleague Elizabeth Way and I will be presenting our exhibition Head to Toe, which explores more than 200 years of women's dress from 1800 through the early 21st century, focusing on the role that accessories play within the total ensembles of Euro-American women's fashion. For our presentation today, we will highlight shoes in particular, how they contribute to a total look, as well as some of the social and cultural values that accessories have expressed over time.
So we're going to start with this piece here. This is a single shoe that we have in our collection at the Museum at FIT. And everything in the Head to Toe exhibition is part of our permanent collection. So this is the earliest shoe that we have in the exhibition. You can see it's from the early 1800s, and it's quite a simple little silhouette, but you can see this really beautiful pieced leather work in both black and pale blue. So fashionable shoes at this time were quite delicate. They were little slippers. And this is really differentiated from a work shoe, a boot, something that was done for practicality or for labor. This is really a fashion shoe. At this time, shoes were not differentiated between left or right. So they were all made on a straight last, and you let them mold to your feet. So you can see that this is quite a delicate little slipper. And as we move through, we have other examples in our collection. These really beautiful red shoes are not in the exhibition, but they really match up well with the fashion plate that you see. So the shoes were not the most important accessory by far at this time period. Fashion had been changing a lot to a much more slim silhouette, as you can see in the fashion plate. And you can also see some other accessories that this woman is wearing, including gloves, a reticule, which becomes a very important accessory, as well as a hat. Included in our exhibition is this reticule from the early 1800s in France. And reticules became really important at this time as skirts became slimmer. Women used to carry things in their pockets, and these were hidden by wide skirts. But with the new silhouette, this wasn't possible. And so these pouches, these fabric bags became really important so women could carry around other accessories and necessities. Shawls were also really important at this time. This is another example from our collection because these dresses were quite thin, they were quite simple. And so shawls became important not just for fashionable purposes, but also practical purposes to keep women warm. And we have a really large strain of exoticism in these shawls. They were imported from India, first coming to France via Egypt. And so we start to see some of these colonial and imperialist relationships play out through the importation of fashion objects. But if we go back to shoes, we can see slight variations as we go through the beginning of the 19th century. Here we have this pair with a little heel. It's still made on a straight last, so no right or left, but you can see these beautiful fabric pom-poms and make some comparisons to this fashion plate on the right, where you see some of this same kind of fabric embellishment on the skirt and the sleeves. And this also gives you a really full picture of the different types of accessories that a fashionable woman would wear, from the shawl, the fan, the handkerchief, the gloves, the hat.
So by the mid-19th century, ankle boots were widely favored for day. And this pair has a bow embellishment, it has pearlized buttons, and we're also seeing more of a return of a small heel, which was a style triggered in part by a nostalgia for the 18th century. Now, although these boots conceal the foot, in doing so, they enhance the contours of the foot and would have highlighted a dainty feminine ankle. And so a brief glimpse of a woman's boot beneath her skirt would have been an alluring sight and could at times even be considered a flirtatious act. Shoes, however, were not the most prominent fashion accessory at this time. Parasols were an accessory that were much more visible and that they were vital to outdoor activities because they served to protect ladies' skin. And in turn, they became visible markers of race and class. A parasol could also be highly ornamental. As you can see in the fashion plate, it almost mimics the flounces of her skirt. And in turn, parasols were also seen as an extension of a bourgeois femininity that reinforced ideas of women as the more ornamented sex. A fan was another very highly visible and important Victorian fashion accessory at this time also, and was considered indispensable at an event such as like a party or a ball. In addition to using it to cool oneself, fans were tools employed by women to flirt and command attention through very orchestrated gestures that they would maneuver the fan. The embellished sequin surface of this fan that you see here by the renowned fan maker J. de Villeroy is indicative of the performative value of this fashion accessory.
But as we move back to shoes towards the end of the 19th century, we start to see some changes. Shoes in general become a little sturdier, but we still see these really beautiful treatments, making them very fashionable. So this is a pretty practical pair of leather shoes, but of course they have this really beautiful gold color on the leather. So objects like these fashion accessories, not just shoes, but a lot of the accessories we've kind of covered so far, are becoming more and more accessible at this time for people in the middle class and even some working class consumers. The Industrial Revolution, followed by the Consumer Revolution, means that there's more products on the market. There's more products that are imitating very luxurious materials. And so all of this becomes much more widely available. People can go to department stores and buy these objects. And so we start to see more and more people engaging in fashion, and accessories become a really big part of that. Just like today, it's a little bit easier to change your accessories, to purchase accessories, and to restyle accessories. So they've always been a really important part of a total fashionable look. By the late 19th century, women are adopting much more pragmatic styles. In some ways, of course, you can see from this figure that the silhouette is very tightly corseted, but we start to see menswear inspiration. Here you can see in the shirtwaist style and the suit, the two-piece jacket and skirt. And we start to see women being publicized doing more kind of overt public kind of movement. For example, bicycling becomes a huge craze at the end of the 19th century going into the beginning. And here we see an illustration by Charles Dana Gibson, his very famous Gibson Girl, idealizes this idea of the new woman. And this is a period where we start to see women advocating for suffrage, entering politics in a much more visible way. Of course, they've always been involved in these ways, but we start to see this visibility. And fashion and accessories play a large part in that.
As sports and travel become increasingly popular pastimes, leather boots become a sturdy and practical mode of footwear for women. Now they were necessary for activities such as bicycling, and we have a bicycling boot on the left on the screen. And they then become a fashionable mode of footwear as well, suitable for activities such as walking, since the boot provided more ankle support. And so that's the boot that we have on the right. Now, although sportier looks were being adopted by women at this time, there was still a taste for the decorative that prevailed. Here we have a fully accessorized formal daywear look that's featured in the exhibition. And so it's accessorized with gloves, a parasol, and kid leather shoes, and a big hat. And what we see here is that the main focal point of her outfit is her hat. Hats at this period were elaborately embellished and could reach extreme sizes, at times almost up to 2 feet in diameter. And feathers were the most coveted millinery trim for hats at this period, so much that exotic plumes really became markers of distinction, in that the rarer the feather that a woman was wearing, the higher social standing that would have been projected on the wearer. And this, of course, had disastrous effects on bird populations and led to the earliest forms of legislation on bird protection. And so by the time you reach the teens, the 1910s, the silhouette gets even slimmer. And with the advent of World War I, we bring about even more rapid changes to women's fashionable dress. And although extravagance was considered distasteful at this time, women were still encouraged to look fashionable. And so what we see in the photograph on the screen is that hats grew smaller and more vertical, hemlines lift, and shoes are now much more visible. They also become available in a variety of styles. And this also speaks to the sort of varied activities that a woman now has in her life during the day. It's worthy to note that one of the most popular style of shoes at this time were elongated toes, because they accentuated a shapely ankle.
As we move into the 1920s, we really associate this period with the invention of modernity in fashion. And we can see, especially on the right, these much more simple looks that perhaps have a lot more kind of similarity to what we're wearing the rest of the 20th century. But we have a lot of things going on in the 20s besides kind of the flapper image that we all immediately think of. And so we still see a continuation of a lot of 19th century accessories. Shoes, of course, are still very important as the hemlines rise higher and higher. And you can see these pump styles worn across these four images with different heel heights. But also hats continue to be important, not just the close styles, but wide brimmed hats at the beginning of the decade. And then also parasols, fans. And on the very right, you see a woman with a handbag. So towards the end of the 19th century, about the 1880s on, we start to see handbags become more and more important as women's accessories. And these are different from reticules because they're made of leather, they're inspired by luggage, and they're really associated with something a little bit more masculine than the reticule was. And this becomes a symbol of women moving outside of the domestic sphere into the public sphere. It becomes a symbol of their buying power, their spending power. In the 1920s, we have more women than ever working. And so the handbag starts to symbolize some of this female independence. But of course, we still have really beautiful evening shoes that we do associate with the flapper. And these are an example in our exhibition on the left, and then another beautiful pair that we have in our collection on the right. So you can see different styles. These metallics were very, very popular, but embroideries like the floral on satin that you see in the pink with the ankle strap, there were a lot of variations on shoes. But in general, just like in the 1910s, shoes want to have a little bit of a heel and a little bit of an elongated toe to emphasize kind of a thin ankle and a shapely foot. As we get into the 1930s, we start to see even more elaborate shoes. You can see these really beautiful examples of pieced leather, again, metallics, very, very important, mixing suede and leather. So a lot of different textural kind of distinctions going on here. And both of these shoes really emphasize the influence of Art Deco. So art movements throughout kind of our period are influencing fashionable dress, but also the design of accessories. So accessories' functions and their overall shape might not change too much, but we see how they reflect the current moment with their embellishments and their styles. Besides shoes, hats and gloves and bags are all very important during the 1930s. And we see this strain of kind of whimsical design. This is a period when Europe is going through a lot of political turmoil, a lot of upheaval. We're right on the cusp of World War II. And in reaction to that, we see some designers kind of taking on this very fantastical style, almost rejecting the political situation. And we also see a lot of historical revival. So you have these gauntlet gloves that are almost medieval. And then we have Schiaparelli, this vase purse on the right. She was really, really well known for her influences from surrealism and this very, very whimsical style at this time.
Now, so World War II created opportunities for women outside the home. And high numbers of women began to enter the workforce and join the volunteer services out of both necessity and a sense of patriotism. And so women's fashion in general at this time becomes much more austere. For a lot of women, a little black dress, maybe made of rayon, was a versatile and practical style that could be dressed up or down depending on a woman's fashion accessories or her choice of accessories. Fashion accessories also become effective propaganda during the war. And so this patriotic pair of shoes that we see on the screen here was not just a fun way to enliven your wardrobe or your look, but also could have served as a morale booster. In the exhibition, we have a large wall with a lot of 1940s accessories to showcase how whimsical and inventive hat, shoe, and handbag styles became during the war years, and also how varied they were. Shoe production, though, was particularly affected by rationing systems in place, and so there was a need to get really innovative with available materials. Shoes grew to their highest heights at this time with platforms that were often made of cork or wood, and cotton or elastic strap shoes were resourceful ways to circumvent material shortages.
So I want to backtrack just a little bit and talk about the differences between the 40s silhouette and the 50s silhouette. So this is something that has a very sharp contrast. We see these more masculine inspired styles in the 1940s, straighter skirts, and all of this is affected by the war, fabric rationing, the need for practicality, limits on the amount of clothes that people can buy. So 1940s fashion was really defined by these traits. But in the 50s, we see a break referred to as the new look, introduced, well, at least credited to Christian Dior in 1947. And here we see a much more hourglass silhouette, fashion that's really inspired by nostalgia and kind of historical silhouettes. So here you can see a really beautiful contrast between these images in Harper's Bazaar from 44 and 47 when the new look comes in. So in the 1950s, we see a resurgence of Parisian haute couture. Of course, couture has been a huge force in fashion since the mid-19th century, but there was a lot of upheaval during the war that made people question whether Paris could really make a comeback. Christian Dior's new look was one of kind of the statements that said, indeed, Paris was still the capital of fashion. At this time, couture houses are expanding, and Dior was at the forefront of this movement. And one of the ways they expanded is that they were producing even more kinds of products, including accessories. Here we have this beautiful pair of shoes and a matching purse. This is Roger Vivier, for Christian Dior made the shoes, well-known shoe maker, shoe designer in his own right. And of course, he's working very closely with Christian Dior to use the same fabric, the dress, no doubt, in the same fabric, this very kind of matched look, very popular in the 1950s. But we also see things like Chanel's quilted envelope bag. This is an iconic bag that becomes really important, introduced early in the 20th century and continued to be made through the 50s, 60s, right on into today. But shoe designers are gaining a reputation at this time, not just Roger Vivier, but also Perugia and Charles Jourdan. These companies have been in business since the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and they continue to make shoes and really bring attention to shoe designers as independent fashion creators outside of fashion houses for the rest of the 20th century. Now, in contrast to this couture look, we have some different things going on in the United States. Of course, many American fashionistas are still craving that couture, wanting to buy that couture and copying those looks. But we also have this American look coming in. Designers like Claire McCardell were very interested in kind of practical, sportier style, something that was really distinctly American. And the shoes that she designs, you can see the contrast in compared to our Roger Vivier's with the little stiletto heel. We see kitten heels and even ballet flats. She partnered with the dance shoe company Capezio to create these ballet flats. And these, of course, become really important in fashion from the 1950s on. And these little ballet flats have kind of similarity to styles that are becoming more popular in the 1960s. So the 60s silhouette in shoes was much flatter, much wider. This was driven by the youth movement, looking at silhouettes of children's shoes since the 19th century. But also we see this pop art, flower power motif here in these flats from 1969. And this goes right hand in hand with the silhouette, this mini skirt silhouette. You can see this Mary Quant example favored very short skirts with tights and flats. So the shoes were really important in reinforcing the entire silhouette. The youth quake really picked up in London and New York, and the haute couture answer to this was the space age fashion. This was a relatively short-lived fashion from the mid-60s, only around in force for about 4 or 5 years, but we see pieces like these boots, these white boots designed by André Courrèges, really take on a life of their own, and they're copied all over the world, and they're kind of rebranded as go-go boots. But again, this silhouette, this very flat silhouette, was really important to reinforcing this new shape in fashion that was very youth driven. And of course, along with his kind of space age boots, he has these really fantastical accessories such as these sunglasses, which are not actually inspired by space wear, but kind of eyewear of Arctic peoples who carve these sunglasses out of bone and other materials to cut down on the glare that you get off of the snow from the sun. But André Courrèges worked in all of these different influences to create this very futuristic and very different style compared to what was happening in couture before. As we move into the 1970s, we see a lot of different looks that support a lot of different types of accessories. You can see the 60s influence carrying through, but also these American disco styles and this menswear inspired style. These are just three examples of things that are going on in the 1970s. Fashion becomes much more individualized. There's a lot more choice, and women kind of join these style tribes and adhere to a look that they find affiliation with. And that might be, for years or maybe just a day, and you could change your look up. But boots that were important in the 60s are still very important as footwear in the 1970s. Of course, these are styled very differently, much more kind of vintage inspired. These are referred to as granny boots on the left, embroidered. So this is mainstream fashion really taking a look at countercultural styles. The hippies is pretty obvious from the decoration that you see here, but mainstream fashion is really looking to these subcultures for fashion inspiration. You can see a couple more examples on the right. Another pair of really beautifully embroidered boots with a platform, and then a more extreme platform in the 1970s, inspired by 1940 styles, but really taken to the extreme.
By the status-driven 80s, shoes in particular became part of an overall look that expressed women's growing equality as well as their financial independence. And so for the working woman who could afford to buy her own designer luxury items, a pair of red Charles Jourdan power heels, which we see on the top of the screen and which are featured in the exhibition, underscore a newfound sense of ease through which women could flaunt their wealth, their status, and also their sexuality. This is just as a pair of Yves Saint Laurent menswear-inspired Oxford pumps could convey notions of authority and gender equality at this time. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, we have a suit by Giorgio Armani, who was sort of one of the designers du jour of the working women in the 1980s. At this time, accessories also became a vehicle through which you can flaunt an aspirational lifestyle. And so a Judith Lieber rhinestone encrusted evening purse was a status symbol also unto itself. In fact, these purses were once described by a socialite as big enough to accommodate a lipstick, a comb, and a $100 bill. And so the vogue for aspirational and statement-making accessories was also evident in the 1980s renewed interest in costume jewelry. And we see kind of this expressed here through this Bill Blass ensemble, which cleverly incorporates into the sequin top these trompe-l'oeil faux strands of pearls. And we included this look in this ensemble in the exhibition, in part because it really brings home this quote that Vogue said, or the statement that Vogue made in 1985, which was, quote, "Bold jewelry pieces give polish to informal clothes, much the same way that high heel sandals do." And so there's this really interesting idea here that shoes and jewelry have the same ability to transform an outfit. The exhibition also looks at some of the music-driven subcultures of the 80s and 90s, where accessories were an important part of group allegiance. And so within hip hop culture, fashion accessories were integral to personalizing a look constructed by the use of gold chains, sneakers, and Kangol hats, such as those worn by Run DMC, or the workwear-inspired styles of rappers, such as the Notorious B.I.G., aka Christopher Wallace. Since hip hop was largely a male-dominated music scene, many female hip hop artists began appropriating men's styles, and then this in turn influenced women's fashion. The popularity of hip hop gave way to a thriving sneaker culture, but also more notably, the use of work boots and gold chains was appropriated by high-end fashion designers such as Manolo Blahnik and Karl Lagerfeld, who offered aspirational fashion accessories that were coveted by many women. Trend cycles accelerated over the last 2 decades of the 20th century, and accessories were a convenient way to navigate those trends. An emphasis on multiculturalism that began in the 1990s was well suited for accessory design. And so a Christian Louboutin pump like the one we see here with a chinoiserie design, or even Christian Dior's Rasta-inspired saddlebag could add an air of worldliness to an ensemble. However, underlying this celebration of multi-ethnic aesthetics were often more grave issues of exclusion, appropriation, and identity politics. This idea that shoes can define a style really solidifies in the 90s when clothes become much more minimal and it's really accessories that come to characterize a look. And so, for example, a slip dress could be transformed from grunge to glam with just a change of shoes. And this is something that we highlight and we showcase in the exhibition. And this kind of idea really highlights the powerful sartorial statements that were communicated through footwear at this time. And so by the end of the millennium, shoes and handbags dominate as the most coveted fashion accessories. And they remain two of the most lucrative products sold by fashion houses today. And this is where the exhibition leaves off. There's one large section devoted to shoes, and we look at Manolo Blahnik and Christian Louboutin, two shoe designers who have really been catapulted to like super cult celebrity status, in part thanks to pop culture and television shows such as Sex and the City. Both of these shoes are included in the exhibition. And the shoe on the right is Louboutin's Pensy Pump, which was his first shoe design that he did with his signature red sole. And so as styles and trends grew more fragmented and individualized over the last decade of the 20th century, shoes played an ever more important role in sartorial expression. Both aspirational and attainable, they continue to be a dominant fashion accessory and an important part of a woman's total look. And to add to that, they're also a symbol of modernity in an ever-evolving world. Thank you.
Thank you.